All right, without further ado, let's begin. Welcome everybody to our class. So what we're doing today, just for those who aren't familiar, I run a homeschool course in Hebrew and in English, slightly different schedules, but currently similar topics. And we're doing a 5-part series called Know Your Neighborhood, from biblical times to modern Israel. It sounds a lot better in Hebrew. Mimea Tanach limea palmach. In each language, there's also cultural differences, so some things get lost in translation. In any event, this is a 5-part course in which every week we look at a different part of the land of Israel and try to understand it historically, biblically, topographically, geographically, militarily. Like there's a lot of stories that are going to come together when we understand the land. And this first class is a free class. It's an orientation class. In fact, we're even going to learn about the word orientation and how it relates to maps. And we're going to see the oldest map of Israel in the entire world, which is really cool. So let's begin, first of all, with orientation. What is it that we are doing? So here is our map of Israel. Now, if you look at it, you might notice there's something a little bit strange. You might not notice that it's strange at first, but when you think about how maps are usually displayed, what am I doing different here?
That it's 3D.
That's fine. I mean, it's Google Earth, right? But look at the direction. You got to know the map of Israel a little bit to get this.
It's sideways from what we normally see.
It's sideways. Very good. We're looking at it the wrong way. We usually look at it like this. Now, Google Earth, which is the program I'm using, has a compass on the bottom right, and wherever you are, if you click the compass, it'll say reset to north. And there you go. And you can play around with the heading and the tilt, whatever you can do. It's a lot of fun. So why north? And why am I not doing north? So first of all, the reason that we care about north today is because of traveling at sea. And when you travel at sea, you need to be able to find the northern star. And the northern star can be located at certain times of the year at different parts of the world. But since we're living on a globe, so if you're at the very bottom of the globe, when you can see it on the other side, you won't know where north is. So the Chinese actually came up with a really clever tool called a compass, which is so sensitive to the Earth's magnetic pull, which faces north, the North Pole, that anywhere around the world, unless you're in the north itself, in which the compass doesn't really have anywhere to go, it will point you north. So you could find the northern star or go in the general direction of north. That's great if you're in the ocean, but we didn't care about that in the ancient world. In the biblical world and in the ancient world and on ancient maps, this is the direction that you look at. Now, my first question is, why? Why do ancient maps look at the region? And I'm only talking about our part of the world, not in America, not in China, not in, right? We're talking about our part of the world. Why is it that in our part of the world, all the old maps are facing east? Does anybody have a guess?
Because of the sun.
Because of the sun. Thank you, Zoe. That is correct. The sun rises in the east. Now, of course, we are talking about this part of the world. So in this part of the world, the direction of east is what we call today the Middle East or the Far East, which the Far East is China, Japan, India, but that's based on where we are in the world. Obviously, when you're there, you're just there. You're not east, you are there. So we're very much focused on this part of the world. Okay? With that in mind, I just want to point out the word orientation, which is really cool. Does anybody know what the flag of Japan looks like?
A red dot in the center of white.
Very good. The flag of Japan is the rising sun because that's the direction of the rising sun. Now, today, it's considered like inappropriate or offensive to call people from the Far East Oriental. So I know of museums that even changed their name, like the Oriental Institute of Chicago became the Museum of the Study of Ancient Cultures, which is a mouthful. So just so you should be aware of that. But the point is that maps would orient themselves to the east. That's why it's called the Orient or orientation. So the east is the sun, and on the west is called the Occident, the Orient and the Occident. So this is just a basic concept in maps in the ancient world. But I would like to delve deeper and go into the Hebrew word. So for those of you who speak Hebrew, this will be a little bit easier. For those of you who read Hebrew, it will be even easier, but I'm going to work with everybody, even if you don't read or speak Hebrew, so we get these concepts straight. And they really help when you're reading the Tanakh, when you're reading biblical stories. So I'm going to quote one verse, which is from Avraham. Of course, this shows up again and again and again, where God speaks to Avraham after Lot, his nephew, leaves him and goes to Sodom. And then he says like this. The verses are written here, the psukim are in Hebrew, and they're also in English. So I'm going to read them in English, but they're here for you to see. And God basically says to Avraham, raise your eyes and look out from where you are. Now look at the directions. To the north and south, okay, to the east and west. Now, if you read Hebrew, you'll realize that this is not a direct translation of north, south, east, and west. North is tzafona, that's fine, that's the same in modern Hebrew, and a compass is called a matzpen, because of tzafon, it points north. But the south is called negba, the Negev, which we'll see in a moment on the map why it's called that, and that's why it's color-coded, the color that it is here. Kedma is east. But for those who speak Hebrew, what does kedma or kadima also mean?
Yeah, it means forward
Right?
usually.
Just like this person is standing. This is orientation. This is biblical orientation. You look forward towards the sun. That is the same thing as Mizrach, which in many houses in the West, which again is all relative, if you're west of Israel, when you're looking towards Israel, you say, I'm looking towards Mizrach. But Mizrach comes from the word Zarach, which means sunrise. Mizrach HaShemesh. So Mizrach literally means the rising of the sun, but it's also forward. And then we have Yama. Yam means sea or ocean, but really sea. I don't think that in Hebrew there's a very distinction between ocean and sea. So I can get confused because I'm a Hebrew speaker. So we're talking about the sea. The Mediterranean Sea is behind you when you are facing forward, when you're facing the sun. So very often in the Torah, you'll find that the ocean or the sea is called Hayam Ha'acharon. It's called the sea that's behind you, which is kind of cool. So now let's take this to the next level, okay? We understood that maps orient themselves towards the sunrise, and we understand that behind us is the sea, so it's called Yama and Kedma. But what about Safona and Negba? And what does the word west mean? By the way, when I say this part of the world, I mean Israel or the Mediterranean, this part of the world, like North Africa, part of Turkey. This is what I mean. So that's a good question that you asked, okay? This part of the world. Okay. Our part of the world, what's called the Middle East. The Middle East, okay? So let's talk about west, and then we'll do north and south. So the sun rises in the east, and here's where it gets really fun. So we call this Mizrach, okay? The sun rises in the east, and then it's really the earth tilting, but it's easier to say it like this. And then the sun sets into the west. Now think of the Hebrew word for evening, which might even be the same in English. When things get evened out a little bit, the sun sort of blends in. I'm not sure if that's what it means, but in Hebrew, the word for evening is erev, which is the same word for west, ma'arav. It's ma'arav. Or the prayer in the evening is called ma'ariv, mariv. But why is that? In Hebrew, erev means blend, like le'arev. Le'arbev means to mix. So it basically is when the sun mixes in, blends into the horizon, which is kind of cool. So in the ancient Egyptian mythology, they believe that the sun god is on a boat, and then he just goes down under into the underworld and then comes up the other side the next day. So we have this in all kinds of interesting ways. So we learned about east and west being Mizrach and Ma'arav, being Kadima and Achora. Really cool stuff. Now let's talk about north and south, and you're going to learn something really cool. So north is called Safon. I'm not getting into what that means right now. It has connections to the Canaanite mythology as well. They have like a Canaanite god called the god of Safon. Whatever. It's called the north. I'm not getting into that right now. But the south has a couple of names. First of all, Yama v'kedma tzafona v'negba. It means Negev. This is called the Negev, the south of Israel. So Ben Gurion University is called the University of the Negev. Now, why is it called the Negev? Anybody who's eaten hummus with a pita, which is the proper way to eat hummus, knows that you wipe your plate off with the pita. You are menagev. You are wiping off hummus. That's how it's called, lenagev hummus, to wipe hummus. The negev means the area that's wiped off. And look, it is. It's wiped away. It's washed away. It's washed off by the waters, by the flash floods of the Negev, which is for another time. One of the other classes, we can talk about the south. So that's Negev. But it has another name, which people living in Israel have lost a lot of sleep on, and that is Yemen. Yemen is Hebrew for right, Yemin. Now let's put this all together. Okay, I'm going to explain what I just said. If you are standing facing forward, facing Mizrach, Kedma, left is north, right is south. In the Torah and in Tanakh, when we say left and right, of course it depends on context. I could be talking about a body part, but if I'm saying you go left, I go right, we were attacking from the left, that's north and south, because you're standing looking towards the sun. That's the assumption. And there's many examples of this. Like speaking of Avram and Lot, as this quote is, Avram tells Lot, hey, if you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. He basically is talking about north and south. And of course, Lot says, nah, I'll go east. I'll take option 3. But that's another story. That's for fun. Okay. Now let's look at the map. One of the 12 tribes, I'll mention the tribes very soon. I'll do like a crash course on what that means. But one of the 12 sons of Yaakov, of Jacob, the grandson of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his name is Benjamin. But what does Benjamin actually mean? It is really simple. He's called Mr. South. He was born in Canaan, which, by the way, if you're familiar with Rashi, the commentator on the Torah, he actually says this quite openly. He says the reason Yaakov called his last son Benjamin, is because he was born in the south, and everybody else was born in the north. They were born in Turkey. So, it wasn't called Turkey back then. It was called Haran, but that's where they were born. So he was born in Canaan, which is south of when you're coming from Haran. So he's called Benjamin, which means the son of the south. So Teiman, the Taf is just part of the structure, the Yaman, Tayaman. Yemen, Teiman, means all the way down south. South. That's Yemen. So that's kind of cool. So Teimana is another word for south. Okay, so that's orientation. Now let's take this a step forward, and we're going to talk about the land of Israel and the period of time that's interesting for our story. Okay, we're going to talk about the period of time that's called the entry to the land of Israel, when the people of Israel have left the desert, the Hebrews left the desert, the splitting of the sea, the whole thing. I'll do that in a few moments, and we start settling the land. So when we start settling the land, we are basically descendants of the 12 children of Yaakov, of Isaac, which means that each one of his sons has become a large family, a clan, a tribe, and some of them have symbols of animals. So, for example, King David comes from the house of Judah. The reason we are called Jews today is because we are descendants of the people of Israel who lived in the kingdom of Judah, because he was the king and his descendants were the kings. So not everyone's from the tribe of Judah, but we are all Judean. We come from the kingdom of Judah. Okay, so the symbol of Judah is the lion. You walk around Jerusalem, and it's the municipality sign. It's on everything from sewage covers to garbage cans to street signs to walls to benches, public parks. That's the municipality of Jerusalem. The first king of Israel was named Shaul, King Saul, and he was from Benjamin, which if you look at this map, this colorful map that shows you the different parts of the land from earlier on that the different clans, different tribes settled in, he's sort of in the smack bang in the middle of the country. If you drive north of Jerusalem towards Shiloh, towards the Shomron, towards Highway 60, which we'll learn about next class, you see this big sign that says, welcome to the regional council of Benjamin. And it says Binyamin Ze'ev Yitraf. Binyamin is a wolf, and it shows an image of the wolf. This is Benjamin. So these are all connections, and we have them until today in modern Israel. For example, until very recently, the adults will probably remember, if you've been to Tel Aviv, what was the name of the bus company in Tel Aviv? It was Dan. Now there's more competition, but it's called Dan because it's called Gush Dan, the Dan block. And you can go to an archaeological conference about the discoveries on Har Menashe or Ephraim. You go to Zvulun. These are things that you find in different parts of the country. There is still a memory of who the biblical tribe who lived there was until today, and you see it in all kinds of different places. So how did we get here? So here's my my brief introductory word, and then we're going to get into some stories. So as far as history and archaeology and academia is concerned, there's a lot of debates and questions about how a bunch of nomads settled the land of Israel and became the kingdom of David and Solomon. Because we know there was a kingdom of David and Solomon. The question was, how much can we prove happened backwards? Where did we come from? What happens in Egypt? So there's a lot of arguments and discussions about what you can and can't know, and I'm not going to get into that. That's a broader conversation. That's academic. What I would like to do is to present the land of Israel through the lens, through the eyes of the stories in Tanakh, the biblical stories. It's a simple way to connect. It's got great stories, and the different stories help us understand the land. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. Okay? So let's get into our stories. I'm going to introduce something really cool that's going to come up a few times in the class. If you've ever been to King George Street in Jerusalem, and you know the Great Synagogue, you walk into the Great Synagogue, or a building called Hichal Shlomo, you can walk up one flight of stairs, and you'll find these really cool dioramas, which means 3D models. It's like made of Lego, except it's not Lego, but they're very, very tiny figurines. And there's about a dozen of them that are on display. The other ones, they just don't have where to put them. From the time of Abraham until modern Israel, all these little scenes. Some of them are more accurate, some are less, some of them are completely made up, but they're fun. So what I want to show you is the one that's, we'll see a couple of them today, but the one that's relevant to the beginning of our story, which is the splitting of the sea. It's a widescreen one. It's a longer one. It's bigger than the other ones. It's really, really cool. And I took my 2-year-old son to see it a few weeks ago. He was mesmerized because there's so much detail inside it. You can get up on a little stool and look at the details. Okay? So, in the details of the splitting of the sea, there is Paro. You could see him somewhere there on a chariot, and there's Egyptians, and they're starting to drown, and Israelites going through and then going into the desert on their way to the Sinai. Right? Okay. So this is the picture. This is the story. Now, I also found it on Canva in a very funny way. So look at this. Da-da-da-dum. Prince of Egypt and the Ten Commandments are a lot more impressive, but this is still fun. One of the horses looked like it's wearing a dog mask. Look carefully. All right. So there it is. By the way, you don't sit in the chariot. You stand on the chariot and shoot. So, you know, anyway, but it's just Canva. Now, the point I'm making is this. When we left Egypt, there is a story about the splitting of the sea. It is amazing. It's a miracle. It's majestic. It's ooh and ah and wow. And everybody knows the stories, and there's movies about it and stories about it. Great. But what happens when we come into Israel? That is lesser known in popular culture. If you know the story of Yeshua, then you know the story of the splitting of the Jordan River. But we don't usually think about it as something so important and impressive. And I intend to change that today. So stick around. Okay. So a brief overview of the story to get us up to speed is we get to the border of Israel, and Moses sends 12 scouts, 12 spies to scout and travel the land of Canaan and bring back intel, right? So those are called the 12 spies. Why are they 12? I'm sure you could figure that out. 12 tribes, right? One representative from each tribe. Now this is an iconic image of the spies carrying a big grape vine, a big cluster of grapes, that is. And it also says here on this mosaic, we'll see it later where this mosaic is, but it's modern. It says HaMeraglim. And below it is all kinds of mosaics of old Israeli coins. So it's fun. It's a modern It's a modern mosaic, which we'll visit in the end. That's a surprise. Okay. Now, this picture is a mosaic of the oldest picture of the spies ever found in the world. It's from 1005 or 600 years ago, near the Kinneret. It's in a synagogue which is near a kibbutz called Hukok. Now look at the two Hebrew words on the top and look at the same two words in purple on the bottom. I'll translate this to English in a moment, but this is a verse that describes the tribes. Okay? So, this is the verse that describes the spies. So it says as follows: they reached the river, the Wadi of Eshkol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by two of them, and that's what it says on the top, and some pomegranates and figs. Fine. Now, before I get to the story, I want to share with you a really cool image. So look at this. The image of the two spies with the cluster of grapes is the logo of the Israeli Ministry of Tourism, Misrad Tayarut. The word tour and tayar are very similar because it actually says Latour et haaretz. They went to tour, to scout the land. Now I have the old logo in blue and then the more colorful one that's the new one, because logos, you refresh themselves once in a while, but it's still the same idea. The Ministry of Tourism, come and travel the land, great fruit, it's good stuff. We make coffee too. Who recognizes the golden picture on the top left? And where have you seen it? If you're in Israel, you've definitely seen it. Let me make it a little bit larger. Yeah. Yoni.
Wine bottles.
The wine bottles. I was at Rami Levi in Israel. Everybody knows what that is. I was at the big supermarket and I took these two pictures last week. So here's one. And there's the logo. And here's another picture. Okay. So this is the logo of the Carmel Winery. They make all kinds of grape juice and wine, Tirosh, and this is called Sparkling Buzz, Watermelon Mojito, whatever. That's the logo. Now here's something really cool. Where does this logo come from? In 1882, something really important happened in Israel. What happened in 1882 and what does it have to do with the spies? So we might have a class on this later this year. In 1882 began the first, arguably, the first mass aliyah, mass migration to Israel, mostly from Eastern Europe and also from Yemen. We're talking about 30,000 Jews. Before that, Jews have constantly been coming into Israel, but 100 people there, 100 people there, 10 people here, not 30,000. So this is called the first aliyah. The first major aliyah to Israel, the first major migration to Israel. And in 1882, they founded a winery called Carmel Mizrahi, which now changed its name to Carmel Winery. And I took this picture outside the main shop in Zichron Yaakov. So that's the neighborhood. In Israel, people know Zichron Yaakov. Now, they chose their logo from the biblical story of the two spies who brought the fruits of the land because it's showing the blessing of the land. And they were founded in 1882. So this is a great story. Now, I want to tell you one story about the spies, and then we're going to get straight into the story of coming into the land. I don't know the exact details, but there's a famous story where there was a pastor, a Christian pastor, who was speaking to a group of very pro-Israel. Yes, Shira.
What does all this have to do with knowing your neighborhood?
You will find out soon. Okay? There's a famous story of a pastor who was speaking to a bunch of very Zionist Christians, and he asked them a simple question, which even Israelis who speak Hebrew, who know the Torah, will have a difficult time answering. What were the name of the 10 tribes who, after they came back from Israel, said bad things about Israel? What are their names? Who knows any of their names? Anyone here? In the story, the 10 tribes, the 10 spies came back and said all kinds of bad things about Israel and made everybody give up and say, oh no, we're all going to die and our kids are going to die in the desert. We're never going to make it into the land. We don't want to go. Wah! And then Moses says, okay, so you won't go. You want to stay in the desert? You'll stay in the desert. You think your kids are going to die in the desert? No, your kids are going to make it to Israel. So they spent 40 days in the land of Israel. And for every day that they spent in Israel, they were basically punished to spend a year in the desert. And that's why we didn't come into, it's not that we couldn't, that Moses didn't ask for direction, as all the famous jokes go, right? So men won't ask for directions until after 40 years, his wife asks somebody. So that's a famous joke. But anyway, so that was the decree. That's why we were in for 40 years. And before we go into the land, I want to just mention this story. What were the name of the two spies who said good things about the land? Anybody? Yeah.
Joshua and Caleb, I think.
Joshua and Caleb. And that was the resounding answer in this conference. And then the pastor said, you hear that? If you speak against Israel, no one will remember your name. If you speak good things about Israel, everyone will remember your name. And then they all chanted Caleb and Joshua. It's an amazing story. Okay? All right, let's continue to our story. Okay. So we're about to enter the land of Israel, and we're going to learn our first region of the country. And our story begins in today's Jordan. This is a mountain. I was actually there in the year 2000, so it's been a while. It's called Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo, Har Nevo. That's what it's called. This is where the Torah actually ends. Moses dies after climbing Mount Nebo. So what happens on Mount Nebo? I want you to first see the location so that the story will start making sense. If you stand on Mount Nebo, you're looking at the plains of Moab, which today is the country of Jordan, but then was the country of Moab, and this area below the hills is called the plains of Moab. You can see the Jordan River. You can see the Kinneret on a clear day. You can also see the Dead Sea. So you basically have a panorama view of the land of Israel. So what happens here? So here's the story. Okay, so on Mount Nebo, I'll explain what this symbol is in a moment, but if you know the story of Moshe, you know why there's a copper snake here. Okay, it's not a cross, it's just a copper snake.
The copper snake story is the one where the Israelites were punished with snakes, and Moshe made the copper snake so everyone who was bitten by a snake would look up at the copper snake and would be instantly healed.
Very good. And there's a quote of that right below him on the stone, right below the statue on the stone. It says the verse. Okay, so Moses is commanded to climb Mount Nebo, and he wasn't able to actually go into the land of Israel. So God tells him, Heriticha be'enecha v'shama lo ta'avo. These are some of the closing words in the Torah. We read them on Simchas Torah. So he says to him, this is the land which I swore to Avram, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will assign it to your offspring, to them. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross here. You shall not cross. If you can imagine Gandalf saying that. So this is where Moshe gets the last view of the land of Israel, and that's it. So let's see it. Let's see what the view is like. Check out the view. On a clear day, it's a little bit cloudy, but on a clear day, you could really see the entirety of the land of Israel. And if you open up the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, the last part of the Torah where it describes what God showed Moses, you could just look at it and go, okay, he showed him the Gilad until Dan, and the Negev, and the this, until Hayam HaAcharon, until the sea, the back sea, which basically means the Mediterranean. So that's really cool. And here's the big statue of the snake. And right next to it is an old monastery that's like 1,500 years old. I don't remember if I walked inside it. It's been a long time ago. But inside it, there's all kinds of mosaics, which we love mosaics in this class, if you've been around. Lots and lots and lots of mosaics. I don't know what's old, what's new. It looks too clean to be new. Every once in a while, they find something new there. And it's in Greek, by the way. The Christians at the time spoke Greek. They're part of the Roman Empire, and Greek was considered to be the educated people's language. Okay, so for example, the first translation of the Torah is Greek. That's what they spoke. That piece of information will come in handy soon. Now, here's what I'd like to do. I would like to now talk about maps. Okay, so we're about to enter the land of Israel, and we're going to learn about a lot of cool things, but primarily about the Jordan and Jericho. Jordan and Jericho. So it all begins with the map. The oldest map of the land of Israel is actually in Jordan. Okay? It's in a city called Meidva in the Torah. In English, we pronounce it Madaba. and I want to take you to that map. The map is a mosaic on the floor of a Franciscan church, which is right here. It says Greek Orthodox Church. The floor, the map is a mosaic floor of a Greek Orthodox church. You see, it says Madaba, and people outside here next to these transparent ghosts are standing here and looking at a copy of the map. We're going to go inside and see the real one. So let's go into the church. And here it is. Shira, you had a question.
Turn on some lights.
Didn't they write the Torah?
Yes, what's the question, Nadira? Go ahead.
I'm already on it. Didn't they write the Torah in Hebrew, not in Greek?
No, I mean, I'm talking about the first time the Torah was translated, it was translated into Greek. That's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? That's what I'm talking about, okay? It's called the Septuagint. So this is a map of Israel. Now, as you can see, the map is broken, which is really sad because construction workers were doing something and I guess they didn't see it or they didn't know. I don't know. It broke. So all we have left is this little fraction of it, which is very unfortunate, but it's still very valuable because this map is 1,500 years old. It's the oldest map of Israel. Now, do you recognize any landmarks here on this map? Anything at all from the map of Israel? Do you notice what direction it's facing? See, it's facing east as opposed to north, right? This would be north. So if this is north, this is the Dead Sea. And this is the Jordan River. And the Dead Sea was actually a sea that people would sail on, which is kind of cool. We've actually found anchors from the time of King Herod in the Dead Sea. It's in the Israel Museum and it's covered in salt. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this. The Madaba map, there's a lot of numbers here, and this is the map that everybody's looking at outside. It's the same one where we've identified locations because it actually has little labels in Greek that tells you what the places are, which is really cool. It's like a mini Israel. It's a mini map of Israel. Before you go in, here's what to expect. It's for tourists. It's for travelers. It's for people who wanted to see the Holy Land, specifically people in the Roman Empire who were Christian. It's called the Byzantine Empire, but it's basically a Christian empire that's Roman, and they want to see the Holy Land. They want to visit. So let's take a look at a few of the important cities. I'm going to show you two, okay? One of them is Jerusalem. Now, if you've been to the Old City, you may have seen a copy of this, and you may have seen a copy of this in other places. It's a very, very, very famous map. Now, in the Old City, there is a place called the Cardo. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Cardo in Jerusalem, in the Old City. There you go. One, okay. I'm sure Renee saw it, but the screens are off. Okay, this is the Cardo. And the Cardo comes from the word heart, like a cardiologist is a heart doctor. It's the heart of the Old City. It's still there. It's a long, long, long street that has columns on both sides. Yes, Adira.
It looks like a piano.
Yes, it does. It does. Though they switched the black and the white keys, apparently, if you look at the shape. So we could talk more about this map, and maybe we will in the future, but right now I'm just pointing out a few things. Number one, it shows us what Jerusalem more or less had 1,500 years ago, and that's valuable because you could learn what places people knew what they were that long ago, and you could go and visit them because that's the whole point of the map. So if you come to Jerusalem and you see a place where there's like a building and it tells you what it is in the map, but you don't know now what it is, you could just look at the map and go, huh, I guess that's what that is. Okay, that's really cool. So for example, here on the bottom, it says Ephrata, which is I'm near Ephrat. That's the place. This says Nicopolis, which next week we're going to learn about. We're going to learn what Nicopolis is. And right up here on the top left, it says Hagia. There's the word Hagia, which means holy. Polis, which means city. Jerusalem. It's sort of broken up. the holy city of Jerusalem. And it's in Greek. That's one. This is two. This. Who can read what this says? It's Greek. It's not English. Can anybody guess what this says? We're going to read it together in a moment. I'm just giving you a few moments. All right.
Jericho?
Jericho. Very good. So let's look at the Greek. I is like in English. Now, E is like in English. Now, remember that the Greeks learned their alphabet from the Aleph Bet. So if you know what the ancient Hebrew letter looked like, you know what the Greek looked like. This is not the English letter P. It's the Hebrew letter Resh turned into Greek. Rosh means head. There's a neck and there's a head. Yeri, and that's an X. But no, it's not, because the Greeks didn't have the letter X. They had a letter for the sound Ch. This is Yericho. And W, you read wow, like a Vav. Yericho. This is Yericho. Okay? Now, suppose you are a tour guide, and you are now explaining to me what Yericho looks like. Using this map, what can you tell me about Yericho? There should be two things you could tell. Yes. What?
Date palms?
Date palms. Okay, that's one. Yes. Adira.
Fortress?
About there.
What?
It looks like IEPIXW.
Right, because you're rethinking English, but this is Greek. So it says Yericho. Now, date palms, that's very important. We'll find out in a moment why. The other one is, it's so simple that you're not going to even think to mention it. You're like, well, you're making a picture of a city. You're obviously going to make walls and gates. But the city had walls and gates. Okay, so that's an important detail. It's a walled city, at least it was in the Byzantine period, and there were date palms everywhere. Now let's actually go and see it. Okay, so there it is on the map, and there it is, Yericho, and it's surrounded by date palms. Now let's go to Jericho. And here we are. This is modern Yericho, Jericho. Now here's our first point to think about. Okay. In the story, here is Mount Nebo. Moshe was here, and we have all of the people of Israel in this massive, massive flat area called the Plains of Moab, and we are looking into the land of Israel. If you are sitting in California or in New York, or let's say in Boston, Massachusetts, and you are reading the story out of the book, and I ask you, why is the first city that Joshua and Israel go to Jericho? You might not know how to answer that. But if you stand here and you look at it, you go, well, duh, it's the first city. It's the first one. All you'd have to do is cross the Jordan at the Jordan crossing, and there it is. And I'll add on top of that, if you want to move further into the hill, which that's next week, we're going to talk more about the hill. If you want to move into the hill, you have to pass through Jericho. So Jericho is basically the key to unlocking the land. And that makes sense. That's exactly where you're standing. Now, speaking of palms, look at all these thousands of trees. You can guess what kind of trees these are. Date palms. Until today, thousands of years later, Jericho, the Jordan Valley, is a city of date palms. That's just the natural habitat for dates. So Jericho is actually called Ir HaTmarim, the city of date palms. And I'll tell you something even better. If you want to talk about the praising of the land of Israel, you don't have to go to the spies and the fruits. You can call it the land of milk and honey. But what honey are we talking about? Not bee honey, date honey.
Date honey.
Date honey. And as we'll see in later, and we may have covered this last year, is that Israel was known for its palms. And in fact, in the Roman Empire, the symbol for the land of Israel was a palm tree, a date palm. So this is serious stuff. Now let's actually see the site of Jericho. Okay, before we get to the crossing into Jericho, I want to just mention a few important details. So the modern city of Jericho is obviously much larger than the ancient one, but it's in the same location. And this ancient looking mound that doesn't have any buildings on top of it is an archaeological site. It's called a tell. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. I'll tell you what a tell means. There's a famous book called The Tale of a Tell. Look, there's a cable car in the distance. People here are taking pictures, an archaeological dig. Now, many archaeological cities in Israel, ancient cities, are called Tel. For example, Tel Lachish, Tel Socho, Tel Azekah, Tel Shalem, Tel Beersheba, Tel Beit Shemesh. Why is it called a Tel? So we're going to learn a key concept in archaeology that's going to be very helpful in the future. A tell is like a birthday cake. It's like a layer cake. All right. So think about it like this. Let me do this in color. Suppose you have a civilization, a very ancient civilization, who start building a city on a little hilltop. Okay. Now that city is destroyed because of an earthquake or famine or war or a fire. Something happens. People leave the city. Now, in ancient times, they didn't have big machines and bulldozers. So what do you do with all the ruins of the city? You can't just get rid of the rubble. You just fill in the dirt, you take some stones and rebuild, and then you build a layer on top. So this is the next civilization. When this civilization collapses for whatever reason, another civilization comes and builds another layer on this cake, and then another one, and then another one. So I'm sure you get the picture by now. By the time we come today to see it, the hill of layer cakes of civilizations is got many layers and it's very high up. That is the definition of a tell. A tell is a layer cake of civilizations, one on top of the other. That's a tell, okay? So we can get into more details later, but the bottom line is that you can identify certain layers and say that's from this time, that's from that time, because this is when they use this kind of pottery, and that's when they use that kind of food, and these kind of tools, and that kind of weapons, and these kinds of... Fine, you can figure things out like that. Okay, so they dug a lot here in Tel Asultan, which is just the name for Jericho. Look around, so you can dig down, and we found a lot of really cool things, and I want to just show you some of them. So can you see the remains of an old city wall? Look carefully. See it? Now, I'll show you a picture very soon, but I want you to see that there's two different layers. These are stones, okay? And these are mud bricks. Mud bricks. Two different kinds of walls. Both of them existed, both of them were used, okay? That's just part of the story. So, at this point, Yehoshua sends two spies to cross the Jordan and to go into the city and to try to find out what the secrets of the city are, what's going on, what's the mood, what's the thing. Okay? So the two spies cross the Jordan and they go into the city. Now, in this diorama, like the ones we saw earlier, you see the collapse of the city. You see the palms around it, the hills behind it, which we're going to see. And in the story, after crossing the Jordan and after the whole story, Joshua, and everybody basically surround the city 7 times, 7 days. One time each day, they blow the trumpets, they make a whole big deal. And on the 7th day, they circle it 7 times, and then the walls come crumbling down, and then we come and take over the city. Okay, so they made a really cool model of this, which is kind of fun. But now let's talk about the story. So when we dig in the city, we actually found this really deep down ancient wall. And it's very tempting to say, and many tour guides probably say this, we found the walls of Jericho from the time of Yoshua. Look, they're sunken underground. And then the archaeologists will say, yeah, but there's other walls on top of that, and other walls on top of that. And when we explored this wall, we learned that it's so old that it's hundreds of years before Avraham. This has nothing to do with Yoshua's wall. It's a mistake, but it's still an easy mistake to make. You go like, look, it's underground. So what did the walls look like in the time of our coming into the land? Based on more recent studies, this is what we can say, which is mud brick walls. There's also some stone, but mud brick. Now, I've been on digs, and I can tell you that mud bricks, you can often think that they're just packed earth, and you dig through it, and suddenly you go like, wait a minute, these are bricks. Bricks are for kids. No, I'm just kidding. But bricks crumble very easily, and they just get damaged. So not a lot of mud bricks are left. They usually have a very hard time finding them. So we're probably talking about a mud brick wall. Anyway, so they arrive at the city walls, and they come into the city gates, and there's a woman there whose name is Rahab, and Rahab lives inside the walls of the city. Now, let me explain for a moment what that means, okay? Because this is important to understand, and then we'll get into our story, okay? Bem-vindos, os brasileiros. Okay, so we have, I just said something to somebody. Okay, so what do we have? In old cities, and this is something I've actually seen on several digs that I've been, you have two sets of walls in the city. First of all, you have the outer wall that defends the city, and then you have an inner wall, okay? Now, in between the two walls, they do something really cool. They make rooms, and there's another room, and you move further in, and there's another room, and you move further in, and there's another room, and this is called a chamber wall, chomat sogarim. Now, in times of war, they would fill in all of these houses. They'd fill them up with dirt and turn this into a very thick sandwich wall. It was a great fortification. All right, so far so good. Rachav lived inside of one of those walls, apparently close to the entrance. So they get into Rachav's house, and Rachav takes a liking to them. She hides them up on a rooftop. And in the meanwhile, while she's hiding them, she gets a knock on her door. Open up. Open up. It's the king, or the king's army, the royal guard. We heard that 2 spies from Israel came to your house. Where are the spies? So she says, you better chase them now. They escaped from the city right before we closed the gates. Run now and you'll pursue them. Okay? So the soldiers go out to look for them. In the meanwhile, while the search party is looking, she goes back up to the roof and she makes a deal with them. And she says, look, I'm going to help you, but I want you to help me. And they swear to her. They say, we will save your family when we come to take the city. Bring all your family, your mom and dad, your siblings, everyone, your whole family, bring them into the house, and we won't harm them. And she lets them out of the window by rope. And he says to them, and they say to her, put a red string out of your window so we will recognize your window when we come to the city. And that's what indeed happens. And then they save her and she joins the people of Israel. Fine. Now, she tells them the weirdest thing. She says, I want you to go to the hills and hide for 3 days before going back to camp. What does that even mean? Does that make any sense? Well, if you're sitting in a classroom in the middle in outside of Israel, no, it does not make any sense. But if you look at the map and you know the land, it starts to make a lot of sense. So let's think about it like this. You are now a spy who is in enemy territory. You don't really know the land, but you do know that your people are right here on the other side of the river. And you are inside Jericho, right? So where do you go when you're trying to escape being caught, right? The normal, natural, intuitive thing to do is to run back to safety to base camp, right? That's the thing that you're going to do, which is exactly what the search party is expecting you to do. So Rachav says to them, I want you to do the opposite, because the search party are going to look for you. And they're more people than you. They're going to look, they're going to look, they're going to look, they're going to look. They're going to catch you. What you have to do is go into the hills, pack some sandwiches, pack some canteens and some snacks, wait for 3 days until the search party gives up, and then you cross the Jordan and go back home. That makes a lot more sense when you stand and you see the land. If you don't, you have no idea what they're talking about. Okay? So here's the hill. It's the opposite thing you would expect to do. Deeper into enemy territory? Get out of here. So that's what happens. Okay? Now, what we're going to do now is quickly talk about the crossing of the Jordan, and then I have a surprise for you in the end. All right? So, the crossing of the Jordan. So here's the thing. This is the Jordan River. How long would it take you to cross it? do you even need to swim?
No.
See what
No,
I mean?
it is.
So
No, 1 hour.
1 hour? No, 2 minutes, maybe 5. What's the big deal? We leave Egypt with a splitting of the waters. We come into Israel with the splitting of the waters because the water splits. We walk through and then we take the city. Like, what's the big deal? I want to show you 2 things that will blow your mind. Okay? Let's start with the crossing of the Jordan River. The location of the crossing, and it's easy to figure out if you're standing here and you're going towards Jericho. This is it. Okay, so let's go to the crossing. It's called, the crossing is called Kasser el Yahud. That's just what it's called. Now, before we jump in, I want to quickly explain to you something about the name of the Jordan River. What does it actually mean before we cross it? Okay, and this is going to tie into a bunch of things. All right. The Jordan River actually begins up north with 3 different rivers. It's called tributaries, which means the 3 rivers that basically contribute to becoming one river. If you travel to the north of Israel, if you're in Israel, you probably know these places. They're cool water hikes in the Golan. There's Nachal Snir, also called in Arabic Chatzbani. There is Nachal Dan, the Dan River, also called Elidani, Arabic for Dan, Elidani. And then there's Nachal Hermon, which is called Banyas. Fun places to travel. Now, the 3 of them combine, merging into Nachal Dan, and then they move down, which in English, it's kind of funny because Dan and down, it's similar. But it comes down from Dan, Yarden. Yarad means to go down. So it's coming down from Dan. That's Jordan. Okay? So hold on tight. We're going to now cross the Jordan River. I'm going to take you to the very scary crossing point. Kasser el Yahud. Behold, we are now where Israel was. We are on the side of the country of Jordan today. And we are looking into the far distance across the river into Israel. And now we're going to make the jump. Ready? Get set, go. Whew, that was difficult. Watch out. Make sure not to bump on those floating balls when you cross the Jordan. I mean, come on. Crossing the Jordan, what's the big deal? Right?
Yeah.
So let me share with you 2 really amazing things really quickly, and then I have a little surprise for you at the end. First thing is what it says. It says that the time of crossing was roughly around the time of Pesach, which is in the spring, and it says, Hayarden olal gedotav kol yemei katzir. The Jordan is overflowing during the entire harvest period. What does that mean? So what you have to take into consideration is this. There is a bottleneck up north called the Degania Dam. And the dam takes the mighty Jordan River and narrows it down to save water in the Kinneret, for electricity, for farming, whatever dams are used for. There's a lot of dams around the world. There's the Hoover Dam, the Aswan Dam. So on the one side, you see the Jordan from the Kinneret, and the other side, it continues further south. So the Jordan River is really tiny now because of the Degania Dam. So bear that in mind because I'm about to show you something that will blow your mind. But let's get back to the Jordan River, okay? When it says that the Jordan is overflowing during the entire spring, before the Degania Dam was built, there was a time in which the Jordan River would overflow during the spring. It's called the Jul. The Arabs called it the Ul and the Jul, like the up and the down of the Jordan. And on a normal year, the Jordan can get up to about this height. Okay? Now, if you have a miraculous crossing of the desert, then it's a lot more impressive. That's number 1. Now, regardless of the Degania Dam, every once in a while, every few decades, there are such floods that they have to open the Degania Dam. Otherwise, the city of Tveria will drown. And I want to show you one of the last times that happened. That was in the winter of 1992. In the floods of 1992, the entire country was drenched and flooded. And you can see a lot of examples of this. I remember this. I remember going by the Kinneret and seeing trees popping out of the water, tops of trees. And I want to show you a couple of really amazing pictures and tell you a story. So here's a bunch of newspaper articles from back then talking about the water reservoirs overflowing, a boat service in the streets of Ashdod, which usually doesn't even rain there, the life without the Ayalon highway. See, trees have collapsed. A lot of the water escaped into Syria. The Ayalon Valley, the Ayalon highway, forget about it. Right? People are driving on the sidewalk. They can't. It's flooded. And here's a Polish UN soldier was carried away by the reservoir water. And look at this picture. Now, this picture is a picture of the Jordan River. Now, I want you to see something really incredible, okay? I want to tell you a story, then I'll explain what you're seeing. One of my professors in college was telling the story of the crossing of the Jordan River, and he told me that he was serving in the Bekaa, was serving in the Jordan Valley during the floods, and his army base was flooded. They couldn't get out. They needed to be rescued by helicopters. And he had a camera with him, and back in 1992, that's a big deal to have a camera. And he took a picture of the top of the fences of the army base popping out of the water. I saw that picture and I went, whoa, I'm listening to your class. I was bored at first, and then he really got me into it. Now, let me show you, before we get to our final surprise, what the comparison is. So this is the way the Jordan River looks today, okay? On a normal on a normal spring, when all of the ice and the snow in the north, in the Hermon melts and floods the river, it gets to this width, let's say, maybe something like this. What you are looking at is this entire thing is water. That's what we're looking at. So that's a lot more incredible, right? That's when you think of what the Jordan could be. I mean, this is not what was when we were crossing. This is a winter and an extraordinary situation. But just on a normal spring before the Dgania Dam, it was a big deal to cross the Jordan River. So the result of that was that it says as follows. After the crossing, God basically made Joshua great in the eyes of all of Israel, and they treated him, they feared him, they had awe from him like they did from Moses his entire life, right? Because that crossing was the big ooh and the big ah. Okay, here's our surprise, and with that we're going to end. If there's any Q&A, I'll stay for a few minutes in the end, but we're already over time. So back to our Greek mosaic from the Madaba map. But did you know that there's a Hebrew version of it somewhere in Israel? You see that? And the Hebrew version of it is in Akko. Let's go there. That's our final stop. The Tunisian Or Torah Synagogue in Akko. Now, on the outside, it's kind of a funky looking synagogue. But if you've ever been, I've been there a few times, it's really cool. You'll know that the inside of the synagogue, from floor to ceiling, from head to toe, is mosaics. The entire building on the inside, there's tons of them. So all kinds of themes, flora and fauna, animals and plants, locations, archaeology, ancient coins, pictures, Jerusalem, lots and lots of stuff. It even says here above one of the doors, Akko, Ir benachalat Asher, benachalat Shevet Asher. Akko, a city in the tribe, in the portion of the tribe of Asher, and then it probably says Akko or Asher in hieroglyphics and in cuneiform. I don't know, I have to be there to ask someone, but you see that. And the entire ceiling is the map of Israel in Hebrew. Now, the map of Madaba is fragmentary, it's broken, but they reconstructed it. Here, they added the missing parts. So there's Yericho, and right next to it is this little building which has 12 white stones. And there was a note here in Greek, they didn't put it in the Hebrew, I guess it didn't fit, which said the place of the 12 stones. What is the place of the 12 stones? 12 tribes. Joshua told each one of them, when we cross the Jordan River and you're walking on dry land in a place that's usually covered, I want each one of you, representatives from the 12 tribes, to take one stone and place it in the place we're going to camp tonight, in a place called Gilgal, so that when your children ask you, what is this? You'll say, these are the 12 stones when we cross the Jordan. Now, 1,500 years ago, a place like this existed, because it's on the map that's supposed to tell people go there and find it and take pictures and take a selfie, and they have mugs and they have t-shirts and they have postcards and send them home, and it's a tourist site. People would go there. So today there's nothing there. I don't know what happened to it, but there was something there 1500 years ago. So to wrap up our story for today, our first class on knowing the neighborhood is understanding directions, orientation, the directions and what they mean in Hebrew, and also what the Jordan River means, and understanding the Jordan Valley, and the first story of coming to the land of Israel, crossing the Jordan, going into Jericho. Why Jericho? Why did the spies move further into the hill instead of running back to the Jordan River crossing, and all that stuff? And next week, we're going to talk about the longest traffic jam in the Ayalon Valley, the traffic jam that made history. So hopefully I'll see you next week. And until then, I'll wish you a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, Shabbat Shalom, wherever you are around the world.